Welcome to Narrative Nights. Step into a world of mystery, intrigue, and suspense. At Narrative Nights, we bring you thrilling detective stories that will challenge your mind and keep you guessing until the very end. Before we begin, we'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let us know which part of the globe you're watching from. We're all united by the love of a good mystery. Let the investigation begin. Miss Marple and the Mark of a Witness. Chapter 1. Shadows Among the Roses. It was a warm and drowsy morning in the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, the sort of morning where the air felt like silk and time itself seemed to pause. Sunlight filtered lazily through the broad canopy of the old elm by the fence, casting golden flecks across the garden path. The scent of honeysuckle clung sweetly in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of damp soil and early blooms. Miss Jane Marple, in her usual pale blue gardening smock and faded straw hat, was in her back garden tending to her delphiniums. The flowers stood tall and proud, their spires bursting with colour. She watered them with slow, practiced movements, each gesture gentle, almost reverent. Her hands, though weathered and wrinkled with age, carried a delicate grace, the kind that comes from years of knowing exactly how to care for living things. A few yards away, beside the rose bushes, Florence the maid knelt in the dirt, methodically pulling weeds with quiet determination. The only sounds were the trickle of water from the watering can and the soft buzz of bees lazily drifting between petals. After a moment of silence, Florence straightened up slightly and tilted her head, eyeing Miss Marple with subtle curiosity. "Is something troubling you, miss?" she asked gently. "You seem rather far away this morning." Miss Marple looked up from her flowers, her expression distant. There was a small crease between her brows, and the corners of her mouth were drawn in a thoughtful line. "It's Raymond," she said at last. "His birthday is nearly upon us, and I haven't the faintest notion what to get him." Florence smiled. "What sort of things does Mr. Raymond fancy these days?" A wistful chuckle escaped Miss Marple. As a child, it was all noise and wheels, cars, jeeps, miniature engines. He once built a toy lorry entirely from bits of string and scrap tin. Very clever, even then. But now, she sighed, pausing to pluck a stray leaf from a daisy. Now he travels. Trains, riverboats, distant lands with impossible names. He's grown fond of movement. Florence brushed the soil from her hands. Then perhaps a travel journal, a proper one, with good paper and a leather cover, something he could carry with him on his journeys. Miss Marple looked up, a smile lighting her features. "Oh, Florence, what an excellent idea. Practical, yet thoughtful. Yes, I believe that would suit him perfectly." Before Florence could reply, a sharp knock rang out from the front gate, abrupt, unexpected, and quite out of step with the morning's serenity. Florence turned toward the sound. "Shall I see who it is?" "If you would be so kind," Miss Marple said, setting down her watering can with care. Florence rounded the cottage and approached the gate. A young man stood just beyond it, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. He looked to be in his early 20s, with tousled hair, rumpled clothing, and the wary eyes of someone unsure of his welcome. "Yes?" Florence asked, peering through the slats of the gate. "I'm here to see Miss Marple," the young man said, his voice uncertain but steady. Florence narrowed her eyes slightly. "And you are?" "Edward, George's son, from the laundry just down the lane." She studied him for a moment, then turned back toward the garden. "Miss Marple?" "There's a young man here. Edward, he says." "George's boy." Miss Marple emerged from behind the clematis, pulling off her gloves and walking to the gate with composed curiosity. "Edward," she said slowly, looking him over with a shrewd gaze. "Weren't you the one caught filching sweets from the school tuck shop? And didn't your father once turn you out for taking his watch?" Edward shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, Mum, that was me." Miss Marple folded her gloves with slow precision. Her voice remained mild, but her eyes missed nothing. I hear your reputation hasn't improved much since then. Still finding yourself on the wrong side of decency?" "I've made mistakes," Edward admitted, his voice quiet. "But I'm not here to lie or beg. I came because I need help." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Go on then." He looked over his shoulder nervously, his voice dropping lower. "It's the guest house, just outside the village, the one near the old wood. I was there 2 nights ago, trying to steal something." "I rather guessed that," she murmured, not without irony. "I didn't plan on finding what I did. I climbed in through the kitchen window. It was pitch dark. I was feeling around when I tripped, dropped my torch. When I got it lit again..." He paused, his face pale. "There was blood, a lot of it, and a woman lying there. She was dead." Miss Marple didn't flinch. Her eyes remained locked on him, steady and sharp. "I panicked," Edward said. "I didn't touch her, didn't take anything, but I must have left footprints in the blood. If someone finds that scene and traces it back to me..." He trailed off, his voice cracking. "Please, Miss Marple, I didn't kill her, I swear it. I know I've done wrong, but not this. I just want someone to believe me." For a long moment, there was only the faint rustle of wind through the roses. Then Miss Marple's expression softened, though her eyes remained thoughtful. "That would be Alistair's place, wouldn't it?" she asked. "Reclusive sort, always had a way of keeping to himself." Edward nodded quickly. "Yes, that's the one." "Well," Miss Marple said, removing her hat and smoothing back her hair, "you've certainly managed to land yourself in a tangle, but I suppose it's better you came to me than ran off into the countryside." Edward's face lifted with something like hope. "You'll help?" "I'll look into it," she said briskly. "But don't confuse that with forgiveness. You've a long road yet, Edward." "I understand." Miss Marple turned back toward the garden path, already deep in thought. "Now then," she said, "tell me everything. The time, what you saw, what you heard, every detail, no matter how small. It's time we begin." And just like that, quietly and without warning, another of Miss Marple's investigations began, not with a letter or village gossip, but with a frightened young man, a bloody trail, and a body lying in the dark. Chapter 2. The House with a Locked Door. Miss Marple regarded Edward with quiet composure, though there was no mistaking the firmness in her voice. "The first thing we must do," she said, "is take this matter to the police." Edward paled, his shoulders stiffened slightly as if bracing for a blow. "Do we have to? They'll never believe me." "That may well be true," Miss Marple replied, gathering her gloves. "But what matters more is that you came forward. There is a dead woman involved now, and that takes this far beyond your past mischief. Come along." The walk to the St. Mary Mead police station was a brisk one, though the mood between them was anything but light. Edward walked a pace behind Miss Marple, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his gaze fixed on the cobbled path. Normally, the village felt alive at this time of day, garden gates open, windows ajar, the scent of baking bread drifting through the air. But now the streets felt subdued, as though the village itself was holding its breath. Miss Marple, for her part, said nothing during the walk. She was thinking, quietly, carefully. She was already piecing things together. When they arrived, the station door creaked open to reveal Constable Blackwell, a young man who straightened immediately upon seeing Miss Marple. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said politely. "Everything all right?" "I rather think not," she replied, stepping inside. "I need to speak to Inspector Arthur, at once." With little fuss, they were shown into the main office, a tidy if slightly cluttered room where Inspector Arthur sat surrounded by ledgers, scattered notes and half-drunk tea. The inspector, a heavy-set man with grizzled hair and intelligent eyes, looked up the moment they entered. His gaze moved from Miss Marple to Edward, and stayed there. "Well," he said, standing slowly, "this is a surprise. We've had your name on file more than once, young man. Petty theft, trespassing, and at least 2 active complaints." Edward opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked ready to bolt. Miss Marple raised a hand calmly. "Inspector Arthur, if I might speak first?" The inspector gave a short nod, folding his arms. "Edward came to me this morning in distress," she began, her voice clear and steady. "He intended foolishly to rob a guest house just outside the village, but instead of valuables, he found something far more serious. A woman's body. There was blood on the floor. He panicked and fled." Inspector Arthur didn't interrupt, though the crease between his brows deepened with every word. When Miss Marple finished, he leaned forward on his desk, fingers steepled. "And you believe this story?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "I do," she said simply. "Edward is not innocent of all wrongdoing, certainly, but I believe him when he says he didn't commit murder. He came to me for help instead of hiding. That ought to count for something." Arthur studied her for a long moment, then turned to Edward. "Speak. Tell me exactly what happened, and no lies. I'll know them when I hear them." Edward swallowed hard and repeated his story. The kitchen window, the dark room, the trip and fall, the torchlight revealing blood and a still form on the floor. He spoke more clearly than he had earlier, as though simply telling it aloud brought some clarity. When he finished, the inspector grunted. "If even half of what you say is true, we have a crime scene to secure. But let's be perfectly clear, this doesn't mean you're off the hook. You broke in, and if we find any evidence linking you directly to the woman's death—" "I understand," Edward said quietly. "I just want the truth to come out." Miss Marple stood. "Before you descend upon the house, might I suggest we speak to its owner? It's not proper to investigate someone's property without their knowledge." "Agreed," Arthur said, already motioning to the constable. "Fetch Alistair, the man who leases the guest house near the old wood. Bring him in and tell him it's urgent." It was half an hour before Alistair arrived. Tall, lanky, his thinning hair swept back with little success, and his eyes darting behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked flustered and confused. "What's all this?" he asked as he stepped inside. "Why have I been summoned to the station?" Inspector Arthur gestured to Edward. "This young man broke into your guest house. He claims to have discovered a woman's body there. We're preparing to investigate and need access. Do you have keys?" Alistair stared. "A body? Dead? That can't be right." He fumbled in his coat and pulled out a ring of keys. "Here, I've not been to the place in weeks. It's currently let. I only go in between tenants or if something breaks." "And who is it let to?" Arthur asked, taking the keys. "A man named Charles," Alistair said slowly. "Moved in a few months ago with his wife and young daughter. He was quiet, paid on time, didn't cause any fuss." "And where is he now?" Alistair hesitated. He died. Just last week. Road accident. Tragic, really. That stretch of highway's always been dangerous. Left behind his wife and the little girl." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "The wife. Do you know her name?" "Margaret, I think. Slim woman, dark hair, early 30s. Always polite, but not one to linger for village gossip. Kept mostly to herself." Arthur jotted a few notes. "And the daughter?" 5 or 6. Sweet thing. Always had a book with her." Miss Marple drew on her gloves. "We should go at once." Arthur nodded. "If there's a body, it needs to be recovered. If there isn't, well, someone's been playing a dangerous game." As they gathered to leave, Edward hovered in the background. Something had shifted in him. A trace of dignity had returned to his posture. It was subtle, but Miss Marple noticed it. Outside, the village had taken on a peculiar stillness. Clouds were rolling in now, grey and low, as though nature itself was bracing for something grim. Even the birds had quieted. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp, anxious. As the group set out toward the guest house, Edward kept his eyes on the path ahead. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't running away, and Miss Marple, beneath her calm exterior, felt the familiar stir of mystery, a house near the woods, a sudden death, and a woman who may or may not be lying in wait behind a locked door. There was something rotten buried in the quiet soil of St. Mary Mead, and it was time to dig. Chapter 3. Whispers behind the door. The sky over St. Mary Mead had darkened by the time Miss Marple, Inspector Arthur, Edward, Alistair, and a pair of constables arrived at the guest house. A low hush had fallen across the village, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. Ivy clung tightly to the stone walls of the guest house, its once welcoming façade now cast in a bleak and brooding light. The windows, dark and expressionless, offered no hint of what had unfolded within. Miss Marple paused at the rusting gate, her eyes tracing the outline of the upper floor. "You said it was just here, near the stairs?" Edward nodded, his voice little more than a murmur. "By the landing, just past the first step. I tripped and fell right beside her." Inspector Arthur gave a short nod to his officers. "We move in together, no assumptions, gloves on." The front door creaked as it opened, revealing the stale scent of disuse. The air inside was thick with dust and old wood, a silence that wrapped around them like gauze. The hallway stretched ahead in shadows, the floorboards groaning underfoot as they stepped cautiously inside. At the staircase, all motion slowed, every step creaked, every breath seemed louder than it should have. Then at the base of the stairs, just as Edward had described, they found her. The woman's body lay askew against the wall. Her head rested at an unnatural angle, and one arm lay twisted across her chest. She wore a pale cream dress patterned with faded blue flowers, now soaked through with dark, dried blood. Her thick auburn hair was tangled across her face. She had been dead for some time, and it showed. Alistair inhaled sharply behind them. "That's her," he said quietly. "Mary Wentham, Charles's wife." Miss Marple stepped forward, bending beside the body with the kind of ease and grace that belied her age. She was methodical, observant, her sharp blue eyes cataloguing every detail. Scattered on the floor near the woman's hand were torn pieces of paper. She picked one up delicately. Children's drawings, crayon sketches of stick figures holding hands, suns with smiling faces, crooked little houses, bright colours now smudged and dirty. "These were done by a child," she murmured. "They're likely her daughters, which means the little girl was here when it happened. Perhaps still is." Inspector Arthur's tone sharpened. "We searched the house, every room. Go." As officers spread through the lower floor, Miss Marple slipped the crumpled drawings into her handbag and climbed the staircase alone, her steps soft and sure. Upstairs, the hallway stretched narrow and worn. The walls bore marks of time, faded paint, scratched wainscoting, and the occasional nail where a picture once hung. She moved from room to room, each door creaking reluctantly open. Bedroom, study, spare room. Then she reached the final door, a smaller one painted yellow, its handle just slightly lower than the others. Inside, the room had clearly belonged to a child. A single bed sat beneath the window, its quilt half pulled to the floor. Toys were scattered across the rug, a teddy bear with one ear missing, a wooden duck on wheels, and a child's tea set, one cup broken neatly in two. Everything was still, too still. Miss Marple scanned the room, then turned to the wardrobe. Her hand hovered briefly before opening it. There, curled up in the back corner, was the girl. She couldn't have been older than 5. Her knees were drawn tightly to her chest, her arms wrapped protectively around them. Her blonde hair hung across her face in tangled strands, and her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared up in silent terror. Miss Marple knelt slowly, her voice gentle and low. "My dear, you're safe now." The child didn't speak. She didn't move. "I'm Miss Marple. No one will hurt you. You've been very brave." Still nothing, just the sound of her shallow, trembling breaths. Reaching into her handbag, Miss Marple pulled out one of the crayon drawings. "Is this yours? A very fine house you've drawn here. And such a cheerful son." The girl stared, unmoving. There was something chilling about the depth of her silence. "She's in shock," Miss Marple whispered. Perhaps unable to speak, or unwilling, best not to press. Inspector Arthur entered the room just then and froze at the sight. Good Lord, she's here. She's unharmed physically, Miss Marple said, rising, but she needs quiet and warmth and someone who knows how to reach her. I'll call the doctor and a social worker. Miss Marple gave a nod. No questions, not yet. As Arthur made his calls, she turned back to the room. A small table beside the bed caught her attention, cluttered with colouring books, a stuffed rabbit, and beneath them a few folded documents. Carefully, she lifted them. Among them was a marriage certificate. The names clearly printed in faded ink, Charles Wentham and Mary Browning, married at St. Mary Mead Parish Church, dated 3 years prior. So it is Mary, she said softly. No mistake. She added the document to her handbag and returned downstairs, where Alistair was pacing in the front parlour. We found the child, she informed him. His eyes widened. Alive? Yes. She was hiding upstairs in the cupboard. She's shaken, but unharmed. He exhaled. That poor girl, her father gone last week. And now this. Miss Marple studied him. When you rented the property to Charles, did you collect any personal records? An address, perhaps? I always do, he said. Emergency contact, previous residence, that sort of thing. May I see it? He retrieved a worn slip of paper from his wallet and handed it to her. The ink had faded, but the address was legible, a residence in a nearby town, less than an hour's drive away. She handed it to Inspector Arthur. We should visit. There may be answers there. He nodded grimly. I'll take a team. Constable, escort Edward back to the station for further questioning, and call for the coroner. The body must go to the hospital immediately. Alistair stepped forward. I'll stay behind. Start cleaning things up. Miss Marple's voice was sharper now. No, Mr. Alistair, you'll do nothing of the sort. This house is now a crime scene. No one is to touch anything until the investigation is complete. Inspector Arthur reinforced her words. Sealed until further notice. That includes you. Outside, the village lay beneath a ceiling of deepening clouds. The wind was rising slightly, a subtle promise of rain in the air. As they stepped back onto the lane, Miss Marple paused and looked back at the house. It stood silent once again, but not empty. Somewhere behind those walls lay answers. Maybe in a drawer, perhaps in a letter or a photograph or a misplaced key. The walls, if they could speak, might tell them who had spilled blood on the floor, and why a little girl had been left to hide among toys and shadows. But walls don't talk. People do. And Miss Marple knew better than most how to listen. The path forward was darkening, but the shape of the mystery was beginning to form. And even the silence now was starting to make sense. Chapter 4. The Secret Wife. The ride to Charles Wentham's former residence was a quiet one, marked only by the occasional hum of the engine and the soft rustle of the little girl's movements beside Miss Marple. She sat in the back of the police vehicle, the child nestled closely, clutching tightly to the edge of her shawl. The silence between them felt heavy, somber yet intimate, as if the child found comfort in Miss Marple's presence, despite the unsettling events unfolding around them. Inspector Arthur, seated in the front, occasionally glanced back at them through the rear-view mirror. His brow furrowed as he muttered under his breath. We're in deep waters now, too many people pretending not to know anything. As the car approached the Wentham residence, the house came into view, a modest stone structure at the edge of the village. The roses growing unevenly along the fence were the only signs of life, their blooms too sparse to fully mask the sense of neglect. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn tight, as though hiding the secrets within. The front door was opened by a woman in her mid-40s, her lined face and tired eyes betraying the burdens she carried. She regarded the visitors warily. Yes? Miss Marple and Inspector Arthur here to see the family, the inspector said politely, flashing his badge. The woman stepped back, a reluctant invitation. Come in. Inside, the house was a reflection of its inhabitants, warm but worn, familiar but worn down by time. The floral wallpaper had faded, and the wooden furniture showed the signs of years of use. Miss Marple made her way swiftly to the sitting room, where the family had gathered. There were 5 of them: Annie, Charles's elderly mother, whose stiff posture and guarded gaze suggested a woman who had long since stopped sharing her thoughts; Lucas, his younger brother, a stout man with a square jaw and a watchful manner; Dorothy, Lucas's quiet wife, who gripped a tea towel nervously; Amelia, their teenage daughter, standing awkwardly by the door, uncertain; and lastly, the little girl sitting near Miss Marple, still clutching her drawing to her chest. Miss Marple addressed them calmly. "I understand Charles died in a road accident recently, a terrible loss, and I offer my condolences." The room murmured in response, their gratitude palpable, but the air was thick with something unspoken. "There is, however, something more I must share," Miss Marple continued, her voice unwavering. "Earlier today, a woman's body was discovered at the guest house where Charles had been staying. She was found near the staircase, dead." The family reacted immediately, disbelief filling the room. "That's impossible," Lucas exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and denial. "Charles's wife, Lily, is right here." Miss Marple turned her gaze to Lily, who had remained silent until then. She nodded gently. "Yes, she is, which raises a rather serious question. If Lily is here, then who was the woman living with Charles at the guest house?" The room fell into a stunned silence. "We don't know," Lucas said finally, his voice strained. "We had no idea he was living with anyone else." Inspector Arthur, his tone sharp, pressed on. "Surely someone must have known. Your family?" Annie's shoulders stiffened. "There were things Charles didn't tell us," she said, her voice terse. "He became more distant these last few years." Miss Marple took a slow, deliberate breath and reached into her handbag. She carefully removed a folded document and held it out for all to see. "The woman's name was Mary. She wasn't a stranger. She was his wife." Gasps and uneasy movements followed as Miss Marple held up the marriage certificate. The document was official, a legal marriage certificate between Charles Wentham and Mary Denning, dated 7 years ago, a fact none of them had known. A heavy silence descended. Dorothy, her voice trembling, spoke first. "He never mentioned her, not once." Lucas shook his head in disbelief. None of us had a clue. But it was Lily who finally spoke, her voice calm but laden with a quiet weight. "I knew," she said, her eyes fixed on the little girl. "He told me." Everyone turned toward her, stunned. Even Amelia, who usually kept her distance, was caught off guard. "You knew about Mary?" Annie asked, disbelief lacing her words. "Yes," Lily replied, her voice steady. "We couldn't have children. It was something Charles wanted more than anything. 7 years ago he told me he was going to marry another woman. I agreed to stay silent. I thought it would bring him peace." Miss Marple's gaze was steady as she studied Lily's face. "But recently he changed his mind?" Lily nodded. "Yes, just before the accident. He came to me, conflicted, angry. He told me he was planning to leave Mary." "Why?" Inspector Arthur asked, his curiosity piqued. "Because she was having an affair," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "With Alistair, the man who owns the guest house." The name landed like a stone thrown into still water. "My husband found out," Lily continued, her expression darkening. "They'd been meeting in secret. There were arguments. He confronted Alistair twice, nearly came to blows. He told me everything, but asked me not to say a word." Miss Marple's brow furrowed in thought. "Why did he decide to move into the guest house then?" Lily's gaze was distant, as if recalling something painful. "I think he wanted to see things for himself. He never admitted it, but I knew he was watching them. Waiting." Miss Marple exchanged a brief glance with Inspector Arthur. "If what you're telling us is true," the inspector said, Then Alistair had both the motive and the opportunity. "And perhaps the child saw more than she's letting on," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes drifting to the little girl, who sat motionless, her drawing still held close to her chest. Turning back to the family, Miss Marple concluded, "Thank you for your honesty. We won't trouble you further. For now." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the path as they made their way back to the car. Miss Marple's voice was low, but determined. "We need to speak to Alistair again. There are too many things he hasn't told us. I suspect he knows more about Mary's death than he's letting on." Inspector Arthur's jaw tightened. "Agreed. Let's visit him again, but this time fewer questions and more pressure." Miss Marple nodded, resolute. The truth, as always, was hiding in plain sight, and Miss Marple would uncover it no matter where it lay. Chapter 5. Unspoken Clues. As the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a soft, muted glow over the village, Miss Marple, Inspector Arthur, and the silent child made their way toward Alistair's house. The little girl stayed close to Miss Marple, her small hand clutched tightly in the elderly woman's gloved fingers. She hadn't spoken a word since leaving Charles's family home, but there was something in her quiet presence, the way she held on so tightly, that suggested she was absorbing everything around her. Alistair's house stood on the edge of a winding lane, a simple stone cottage, its well-kept exterior betraying little of the care, or lack of it, given to the inside. The hedge was neat, but the garden seemed dry and neglected, as if its caretaker had forgotten the art of tending to it. When they reached the gate, a woman stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression curious. "Yes?" she asked, eyeing them with mild suspicion. Miss Marple stepped forward. "Good afternoon. We're here to speak with your husband, Alistair. Is he home?" "He's in the bath," the woman replied. "But he won't be long. Do come in and wait." They entered the parlour, a tidy, sparse room with mismatched cushions and the faint scent of lavender polish lingering in the air. The woman offered them tea, but Miss Marple declined with a polite shake of her head. The little girl sat next to her, still clutching a corner of Miss Marple's shawl, her silence as heavy as the room. A few moments later, Alistair emerged from the back of the house, his hair damp and his shirt sleeves rolled up. When he saw them standing in the doorway, he hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his face. "Miss Marple? Inspector?" His voice was careful, controlled. "We need to speak with you," Miss Marple said immediately, her tone steady but insistent. "Would you prefer we speak privately, or is it all right if your wife remains?" Alistair glanced at his wife, then back at the two visitors. "You can say what you like in front of her. I've nothing to hide." Miss Marple wasted no time. "We've come to learn that you were involved with Mary, Charles Wentham's second wife." Alistair sighed deeply and sank into a chair, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "She was after me for a long time, even when Charles was still alive. She'd come by the property, find excuses to talk to me, linger around longer than she needed to. But after Charles died, it got worse." He stopped, collecting his thoughts. "She started saying she didn't want to be with him anymore. She'd gotten what she wanted, a child, and she was ready to move on. She told me she'd even give me the little girl if I married her." Miss Marple didn't interrupt. She simply listened, her eyes calm and steady. "I told her no," Alistair continued, his voice thick with frustration. "I have a wife. I'm not the sort to leave my family." But Mary didn't stop. She started talking about the farmhouse, about money, about land, inheritance. She said she'd sent a legal notice to Charles's family, demanding a share of the property. "We'll be rich soon," she told me. I told her that would never happen. I wouldn't be part of her schemes. Inspector Arthur leaned forward, his expression intense. "Did you tell anyone else about this?" "No," Alistair replied quickly. "I didn't want trouble. I tried to keep my distance, but she kept coming back." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Alistair's wife, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. Her arms were crossed and her expression was tight. Disapproval perhaps, but not shock. "You knew?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but pointed. "I knew enough," the woman replied, her voice stiff. "I saw her around. I saw the way she looked at him. But I trust my husband. I knew he wouldn't do anything foolish." Miss Marple gave a small nod of understanding. "Thank you. That will be all for now." They stood, and Alistair followed them to the door. Outside, the village was still, the pale evening light casting long shadows across the quiet street. The little girl, still holding Miss Marple's hand, looked up at her for the first time since they'd arrived. Her gaze met Miss Marple's, silent but full of something unspoken. A depth of sorrow or fear, as though the child understood more than she was willing or able to say. As they walked away from the cottage, Inspector Arthur broke the silence. "Well, he certainly gave us motive and character, but there's no proof. Nothing concrete." Miss Marple stopped, her gaze turning thoughtful. "Not yet. But the mention of the legal notice, that's something we can trace. If Mary was planning to claim the property, she would have needed a solicitor. And that solicitor may hold the key to understanding her final days." Arthur nodded slowly. "I can get a list of the local firms. We'll start there." They returned to the car, and as the inspector drove, Miss Marple sat quietly in the back, the little girl leaning against her side. The child had softened, her grip now less rigid, her breathing steadier. Miss Marple stroked her hair once, gently, and the girl didn't flinch. "There's something we're not seeing," Miss Marple murmured softly, more to herself than anyone else. Mary was not just desperate, she was determined. A woman doesn't go to the lengths of confronting two households, manipulating a man, and filing property claims unless she's certain of the outcome. She must have believed something, or someone would protect her. "You think she was working with someone?" Inspector Arthur asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Or against someone," Miss Marple replied quietly. By the time they reached the village, the sun had slipped below the horizon, and the evening had taken on a cooler, more somber tone. A breeze swept through the narrow lanes, carrying the scent of earth and rain. The mystery surrounding Mary's death was deepening, becoming more tangled and complex with every turn. But Miss Marple, with her long years of experience unraveling the most intricate of puzzles, knew that the truth always left traces, however faint. She would follow Mary's trail to the solicitor's office, and each step would bring them closer to the answers they sought. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Miss Marple was ready to fit them together, no matter how long it took. Chapter 6. The Crayon Witness. By the time Miss Marple, Inspector Arthur, and the little girl arrived at the courthouse, the morning light had faded into a chill, silvery hue. The building, with its tired stone façade and iron railings flecked with rust, stood like a relic from another time. Flower beds along the base had been long neglected, their withered stalks bowing in the breeze. The girl clutched Miss Marple's hand tightly, her small feet dragging slightly with each wary step. Her wide eyes flicked toward every shadowed corner as they moved through the quiet halls. Miss Marple scanned the corridor until her eyes landed on a man at a desk, hunched over a stack of disordered folders. His ink-stained fingers moved with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Kendall?" she asked, her voice kind and steady. The man looked up from his work. "Yes, that's me." "I'm Miss Marple, and this is Inspector Arthur. We'd like to ask you about a legal matter you may have handled recently, a property claim filed by a woman named Mary Wentham." Recognition flickered across Kendall's face, followed by caution. "Yes, I remember her. She came to me about a fortnight ago." "She claimed legal rights to the Wentham estate?" the inspector asked. Kendall nodded. "She provided a marriage certificate and other documentation. Everything appeared legitimate." I was instructed to draft and deliver a formal notice to the Wentham family asserting her claim to the farmhouse." "And how was that notice delivered?" Miss Marple asked. "We use a court-appointed delivery man, Thomas Brigg. He handles official dispatches." "Is he in the building today?" Kendall stood. "He should be sorting mail in the rear office." They followed him down a narrow hallway with the scent of parchment and polish hanging in the air. The hum of muffled conversations echoed faintly behind the wooden doors they passed. Eventually, they reached a room lined with cubbyholes and file boxes. A large man with a broad frame and a balding head looked up as they entered, removing a wool cap from beneath his arm. "Mr. Brigg?" the inspector asked. "Yes, sir." "We're inquiring about a recent delivery," Miss Marple said gently. "A notice sent to the Wentham family home on behalf of Mary Wentham. Do you recall it?" Brigg scratched his chin thoughtfully, then nodded. "Yes, I remember. It was delivered about 2 weeks ago. Stood out to me because of the name." "Do you remember who accepted it?" Arthur asked. "Aye, it was a woman. Not old, but not young either. Dark hair, tied back, wore a navy coat. She answered the door without hesitation, signed the slip and shut it again." "Could you identify her if you saw her again?" "Oh, absolutely. I never forget a face." At that moment, the little girl tugged sharply on Miss Marple's hand. Once. Then again, more urgently. She had remained silent since their arrival, but now something stirred within her. Miss Marple crouched beside her. "What is it, my dear?" The girl dug into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, creased piece of paper. She handed it over solemnly. Miss Marple unfolded the page. It was a crayon drawing, slightly smudged from being folded and handled. A house, clearly the Wenthams', stood in the centre. In front of it, near the gate, was a lone figure, a woman in a long coat, carrying what appeared to be a satchel. Her hair was pulled high and tight. But it was the expression that struck Miss Marple, a scowling face, sharp eyebrows, a hard mouth drawn in angry precision. For a child, the drawing was unusually expressive. "She saw the delivery," Miss Marple whispered. Arthur leaned in. "She remembered this." Miss Marple turned to the girl. "You drew this from memory, didn't you?" The child said nothing, but nodded once. Firm, certain. Miss Marple rose and looked at the inspector. "We must return to the Wentham house, now." The drive back was tense. Rain threatened on the horizon, clouds sagging with the weight of storm. As they reached the familiar gate, the house loomed more ominously than before, surrounded by the creeping hush of uncertainty. Inside, the family was gathered again. Annie, Lucas, Dorothy, Amelia, and Lily, all seated in the sitting room. The air was heavy with the unsaid. "I'm sorry to trouble you again," Miss Marple began gently, "but I have just a few more questions." Lucas folded his arms. "We've already told you what we know." "Not quite," Miss Marple said softly, her voice as sharp as a chisel. "A legal notice was sent here. Mary Wentham filed a claim to the house. According to the solicitor, it was delivered and signed for." A ripple passed through the room. Miss Marple continued, "The postman, Thomas Brigg, remembers the person who took it. A woman, dark hair, navy coat, someone who seemed very much at ease answering this particular door." She paused, then slowly unfolded the drawing. "This was done by Mary's daughter. She saw the woman who took the letter. This is who she remembers." The room fell still. The rustle of fabric, a creaking floorboard. No one spoke. Miss Marple's gaze swept across each face. Annie, whose knuckles had gone white. Lucas, looking anywhere but at the paper. Dorothy, who had begun to shake slightly. And then Lily, whose eyes darted toward the picture for barely a second, then dropped to her lap. Arthur stepped forward. "We'll need each of you to confirm where you were when the letter was delivered. Mr. Kendall can give us the exact date and time." Miss Marple turned to the little girl, who had curled up quietly on the edge of the couch. "She may not speak," Miss Marple said softly, "but her memory is clear. She has seen everything, and she has spoken the only way she knows how. There was no denying the shift in the air. Fear had given way to silence, but guilt, as always, hung close behind. Chapter 7. The Picture That Spoke. The sky had turned a heavy, mottled grey as Miss Marple and Inspector Arthur made their return to the Wentham residence. This time, there was no polite distance or hesitant investigation. This was a visit marked by certainty. The quiet strength of the little girl beside Miss Marple changed the nature of the encounter. Her presence, small but unwavering, seemed to bring with it the final piece of truth. 2 uniformed constables accompanied the inspector. The crunch of their boots on the gravel path rang loud in the stillness. When the door opened, Lucas stood framed in the entryway, his face drained of colour. "What now?" he asked, voice laced with defensiveness and fatigue. Miss Marple raised a calming hand. "Please, Mr. Wentham, if you could gather everyone in the sitting room. This won't take long, but it is necessary." With visible reluctance, Lucas turned and disappeared into the house. Moments later, the family assembled again. Annie sat rigid by the fire, her posture still proud. Lucas stood by the wall, arms crossed. Dorothy and Amelia hovered nearby, pale and tense. Lily, ever the quiet observer, slipped into a chair near the child. The girl herself sat close to Miss Marple, her gaze solemn and watchful. Inspector Arthur stood silently behind Miss Marple as she began to speak. "Mrs. Annie Wentham," she said, in a voice that was both gentle and firm. "You told us you knew nothing about Mary Wentham, no correspondence, no legal matters. But that wasn't true, was it?" Annie's chin rose. "I never received anything from her, I've told you." "And yet, a legal claim regarding Charles's property was delivered to this very house," Miss Marple continued, her voice even. "And the postman remembers precisely who accepted it." At that moment, a constable opened the door behind them. "Inspector, the postman is here." Thomas Brigg entered, hat in hand. He glanced around the room. His gaze settled without hesitation. "It was her," he said, pointing directly at Annie. "That woman answered the door. She took the notice from me herself." Silence swept through the room like a wave crashing into still water. Miss Marple stepped forward and gently retrieved a folded page from her handbag. With deliberate care, she unfolded it and held it up. "This drawing," she said softly, "was made by Mary Wentham's daughter. She cannot speak, but she remembers. This image shows a woman striking another, a woman wearing a suit and a hat. Curly hair. The very appearance you had, Mrs. Wentham, the day the postman delivered that notice, and the same as you're wearing today." Annie's hands, clasped tightly in her lap, began to tremble. Her shoulders stiffened and then sagged. She stared at the drawing, her mouth parting, then closing again. A breath escaped her lips like a confession. Her voice came out thin, cracked. "Yes, I took it. I did it." No one moved, no one spoke. The truth had landed. "I killed Mary." Lucas stepped backward in disbelief. "Mother, what are you saying?" Annie raised her head slowly. Her face, once stern and unyielding, was now etched with deep sorrow. "She was trying to take everything Charles built," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "She married him behind our backs, then came here, wanting the house, the land, his name, our legacy. And then she had the gall to send a legal notice, as if she had any right." Dorothy, her voice shaking, asked, "But why didn't you just tell us?" "I was protecting you," Annie said, eyes misting over. "All of you. I didn't go there to hurt her, I swear it. I just wanted to confront her, to make her understand. But she mocked me, laughed, said her daughter would grow up in this house with Charles's name, and I—" Her voice broke. "I couldn't bear it." Her eyes flicked toward the child. "I saw a stick by the fireplace. I don't even remember reaching for it. I struck her. Again and again. I just wanted her to stop talking. I didn't mean to." Lucas looked sickened. "And the child?" Annie looked down. I searched for her afterward. In my rage, I wanted to—" She paused, shaking her head. But she was gone, hidden. I only realized later she couldn't even speak. I thought, maybe no one would ever know. Tears slipped silently down Dorothy's cheeks. Amelia covered her mouth in shock. The room had become a tomb of silence. "I didn't want this," Annie whispered. "I just wanted to keep what belonged to my son." Inspector Arthur stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Annie Wentham, I must place you under arrest for the murder of Mary Wentham." 2 constables moved to either side of her. Annie stood without resistance, her hands at her sides. She didn't look at her family as she was escorted out, just at the little girl, her eyes dark with something not quite remorse, but not defiance either, something in between. Then she was gone. The silence lingered long after the door closed behind them. Lucas collapsed into a nearby chair. Dorothy wept quietly. Amelia stood frozen, lips trembling. Only Lily spoke, her voice soft and knowing. "I always felt something storming in this house," she said. "Now I know where it lived." Inspector Arthur turned to Miss Marple. "You were right. The girl saw it all." Miss Marple looked down at the child, who clutched her, drawing to her chest like a shield. "She couldn't use words," she said gently. "But she told us everything anyway." Arthur nodded. "Will she be all right?" "She'll come with me," Miss Marple said, "for as long as she needs to." They stepped out into the cooling evening. The storm that had hung so long over the house seemed finally to have lifted. A warm sliver of light bled through the clouds, painting the rooftops gold. The girl took Miss Marple's hand. For the first time, her grip was relaxed, trusting. Through silence, sorrow, and the innocence of crayon and memory, justice had finally come home.